The job title on my contract is Facility Decommissioning Surveyor, which sounds more official than the work actually is. What I do is walk through empty buildings, hospitals mostly, regional facilities that have been closed by their parent health systems and scheduled for demolition. I walk through them with a clipboard, a thermal imager, a CO2 monitor, and a set of motion-activated sensor pods, and I produce a document called a Pre-Demolition Environmental and Occupancy Clearance Survey. The survey confirms 3 things: that hazardous materials have been properly abated or flagged, that structural conditions do not present unusual risk to the demolition crew, and that the facility is unoccupied. That last item is the one that matters for what I need to tell you. My name is Caroline Vick. I've held this contract with MedPAR Regional Health for 3 years. Before that, I spent 6 years in environmental health consulting, and before that, I was a building inspector for the city of Dayton. I've been inside condemned structures, flood-damaged structures, fire-damaged structures, mold-consumed structures where the floor dropped away 2 steps in front of me. I am not easily unsettled by buildings. I am also not given to imprecision. My reports are thorough because the alternative is liability, and liability in the demolition field is not theoretical. If I certify a building as clear and a wrecking crew finds something I should have caught, asbestos I didn't flag, a structural feature I didn't note, a person I didn't detect, the legal and professional consequences land on my signature. Because I have never had a survey challenged. I have never had a finding reversed. I need that established because what I'm about to describe is not a story about finding something. It's a story about not being able to confirm that I didn't. The building was Holloway Community Hospital in Darke County, Ohio, built in 1967. 62 beds at peak capacity, operated as a full-service community hospital until 2011, then downgraded to an urgent care satellite until 2019, then closed entirely. MedPAR acquired the property in 2022 as part of a regional consolidation. They stripped the usable equipment. They completed asbestos abatement on the 2nd floor. They disconnected utilities, except for a maintenance circuit that kept the sump pumps running and the security panels alive. They sealed the entrances, steel plates bolted over the doors, used plywood over ground floor windows, and left it. My survey was the last step before the demolition permit application. I was given a key to the service entrance, a copy of the abatement report, and a timeline. Complete the survey by Friday. This was a Monday. The demolition was contracted for the following Wednesday. My supervisor, Dale Keeney, called me that morning to confirm I'd received the packet. Dale is a decent man. I want to say that now because I will describe pressure from him later, and I don't want it to sound like something it wasn't. He is not a corner cutter. He is not callous. He is a project manager with 12 demolitions in his queue and a board that tracks completion against schedule. When he pushes, it's because the timeline is real, not because he doesn't care. I have always understood his position. I want to be fair to him. I drove to Holloway on Monday afternoon. Darke County is flat. Soybean fields, county roads, grain elevators on the horizon. The hospital sat at the edge of the town of Greenville, across from a shuttered elementary school, on a lot that had once been landscaped and was now a progression of untended growth. The building was 2 stories, brick and precast concrete, shaped like a squat L. The steel plates on the doors were intact. The plywood on the windows was intact. The chain on the service entrance was intact until I removed it with the key. No visible breach, no indication of unauthorized entry. I went in. The service entrance opened into a ground floor corridor that ran the length of the building's short arm. Emergency lighting, battery units mounted at intervals, unconnected to the maintenance circuit, cast a thin amber wash along the ceiling. The air was still. Temperature was consistent with the exterior minus the solar load, 58 degrees on a 64-degree day. The floor was poured concrete with vinyl composition tile, partly intact, partly curled at the seams. The smell was standard for a sealed institutional building: dust, mildew, off-gassing adhesive, and the flat mineral scent of concrete that hasn't been ventilated in years. I set up my equipment. The survey protocol is straightforward. I walk every accessible space in the building with the thermal imager active and the CO2 monitor logging continuously. I deploy motion sensor pods at key junctions, stairwells, corridor intersections, large open rooms, and leave them active for a minimum of 4 hours while I complete the rest of my inspection. At the end, I retrieve the pods, download their logs, and incorporate the data into my report. If everything is clean, no thermal signatures indicating occupancy, no CO2 levels indicating respiration, no motion events, I sign the occupancy clearance line. The building is confirmed empty. The demolition proceeds. I placed 6 pods, 1 at each stairwell entrance, 1 at the T-junction of the main corridors, 1 in the former emergency department lobby, 1 in the second-floor nursing station, and 1 in the basement mechanical room. I activated them, marked the deployment time, and began my walkthrough. The first floor was unremarkable. The second floor was unremarkable. The basement was unremarkable. I documented the remaining fixtures, checked the abatement seals on the second floor. So you noted 3 locations where water intrusion had compromised ceiling tiles, and photographed a section of the east corridor where the floor tile had separated from the substrate in a way that might affect debris removal. Standard work. Quiet building. I finished the walkthrough in 3 hours and returned to the service entrance to wait out the remaining sensor deployment time. When the 4 hours were up, I collected the pods. I downloaded the logs to my laptop in the van, and here is where it starts. The logs were not clean. They were not dirty either. That's the problem. A clean log shows 0 motion events and a flat baseline. The sensor registers the ambient thermal and acoustic environment and records nothing above its activation threshold. A triggered log shows clear spikes, motion events with timestamps, durations, and directional vectors. What I was looking at was neither. The baselines on all 6 pods were slightly elevated, not spiking, not triggering, just sitting 2 to 3% above what I would expect for an empty sealed building at that ambient temperature. In isolation, this means nothing. Sensor baselines drift, battery condition, ambient temperature fluctuation, electromagnetic interference from the maintenance circuit, even insect activity can shift a baseline reading by a few percent. I have seen it before. It is not reportable. But all 6 pods were elevated by the same margin, between 2.1 and 2.8%, in 6 different locations across 3 levels of the building. Simultaneous uniform baseline elevation is not sensor drift. Sensor drift is random. It affects individual units differently based on their specific battery condition, placement, and local environment. When 6 units in 6 locations all shift by the same amount, something in the building changed uniformly during the deployment period. The most common cause is a temperature shift, a heating system kicking on, for instance, but the heating system was disconnected. The maintenance circuit ran only the sump pumps and the security panel. I checked my CO2 log. The monitor had been running on my belt for the entire walkthrough, recording every 15 seconds. The readings were within normal range for a sealed building, 412 to 438 parts per million. Outdoor ambient that day was approximately 410. The marginal elevation was consistent with my own respiration in an unventilated space. Normal. But when I graphed the readings by time and overlaid my movement through the building, I noticed that the CO2 levels did not correspond cleanly to my location. They should have been slightly higher in smaller rooms, where my breath would concentrate, and slightly lower in larger spaces like the lobby and the corridors. Instead, the variation was uniform. Every space I entered read within the same narrow band, as though the air was evenly mixed, as though something was circulating it. The HVAC was disconnected. I sat in the van for 20 minutes. I reviewed the data twice. I checked my thermal imager captures. Nothing. No heat signatures, no anomalies. The building was visually and thermally empty. The motion sensors had not triggered. The CO2 was within normal range. The only thing wrong was the uniformity, the evenness of readings that should have varied. I called Dale. I told him the walkthrough was complete, but that I wanted to run a second sensor deployment before signing. He asked why. I told him the baseline readings were slightly uniform and I wanted a comparison set. He said that was fine, asked if it would affect the Friday timeline, and I said no. We hung up. I went back in Tuesday morning. I redeployed the 6 pods in the same locations. I set the CO2 monitor on a table in the first floor corridor, away from my body, logging autonomously. I left the building, sealed the service entrance behind me, and sat in the van for 6 hours. When I retrieved the equipment, the pod baselines were again uniformly elevated, this time between 2.4 and 3.1%, slightly higher than Monday. We're still below any actionable threshold, still not triggering. The CO2 monitor, which had been logging in an empty, sealed building with no human respiration for 6 hours, read 421 to 429 parts per million. The outdoor ambient that day was 408. The differential was 13 to 21 parts per million, above what should have been possible, with no respiratory source and no ventilation. 13 parts per million is nothing. It is within the instrument's margin of error. It is within the range of normal fluctuation from material off-gassing, microbial activity in damp building materials, or residual CO2 absorbed in concrete and slowly releasing. I know this. I wrote my environmental health thesis on indoor air quality in sealed structures. I know what 13 parts per million means. It means nothing. And unless you also have 6 motion sensors with uniformly elevated baselines and no explanation for the uniformity. I did not call Dale on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I changed the protocol. I deployed the pods in different locations. Not the same 6 junctions, but 6 new positions, chosen to create a tighter grid on the first floor only. I left the CO2 monitor in the second floor nursing station. I also did something I have never done on a survey before. I placed a digital audio recorder in the basement mechanical room, set to voice-activated mode with the sensitivity at maximum. I left the building for 8 hours. The pod baselines came back elevated, between 2.6 and 3.3%. The trend was upward. Monday's average was 2.4, Tuesday's was 2.7, Wednesday's was 2.9. The CO2 on the second floor logged 425 to 433. In the outdoor ambient was 411. The differential had not grown dramatically, but it had not resolved. The audio recorder had activated 11 times. I listened to each activation in the van with headphones. 9 were mechanical. The sump pump cycling. A pipe contracting. What sounded like a panel flexing in a temperature change. 2 were not mechanical. They were low, arrhythmic, and broad spectrum. Not a voice, not a machine, not an animal I could identify. They sounded like air moving through a space that was shaped to move it. They sounded like breathing if breathing had no lungs. That is not a scientific description. I know that. I am telling you what it sounded like. I called Dale on Wednesday evening. I told him I was having difficulty getting consistent baseline readings and that I might need through Friday. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me what specifically was inconsistent. I told him. I gave him the numbers. I explained the uniform elevation, the CO2 differential, the trend. Dale said, "Caroline, is there someone in the building?" I said no. Because there wasn't. I had walked every accessible space. I had run thermal imaging on every room. The motion sensors had not triggered. There was no one in the building. The data was consistent with an empty building. It was just not consistent with a certainly empty building. And he asked me what the difference was, and I could not answer him in terms that fit on the survey form. The survey form has a checkbox. The checkbox says, "Facility confirmed unoccupied." There is no checkbox for facility not confirmed occupied, but unable to confirm unoccupied. There is no narrative field. There is no margin for uncertainty. When the form was designed by someone who understood that demolition is binary. The building is coming down or it isn't, and the occupancy clearance must be equally binary to support it. Dale said, "If there's no one in the building, sign the survey. If you think there's someone in the building, call the sheriff. But I need one or the other by Friday." He was right. Those were the only 2 options the system provided, and I had evidence for neither. I went back Thursday. I did not bring sensors. I did not bring instruments. I brought a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, and I sat in the first floor corridor for 9 hours with the service entrance propped open behind me. I sat and I listened. The building was quiet in the way that sealed buildings are quiet. Not silent, but sonically flat, in the ambient noise, compressed to a narrow band of mechanical hums and material settling. I heard the sump pump cycle 4 times. I heard wind push against the plywood over the windows. I heard my own breathing and the creak of the folding chair when I shifted. I heard the coffee cool in the thermos. I did not hear the sounds from the audio recording. I did not feel a thermal anomaly. I did not detect any indication of presence. For 9 hours, the building behaved exactly like an empty building behaves. And the entire time, every minute of those 9 hours, I could not convince myself it was empty. I need to explain what I mean by that, and I need to be honest that I may not be able to. The sensation was not intuition. It was not a feeling of being watched. It was not the atmospheric dread that people describe in abandoned places. The pattern recognition misfire that makes a dark hallway feel inhabited. I have been in hundreds of abandoned buildings. I know what that sensation is, and this was not it. This was an absence of resolution. It was the perceptual equivalent of an image that will not come into focus. Not because it's blurred, but because the focal point is shifting faster than your eye can track. Every time I settled into the belief that the building was empty, something in the quality of the stillness would change. Not a sound, not a movement, a change in the texture of the silence, as though the air had briefly reorganized itself and returned to rest before I could identify the configuration. I cannot put this in a report. I know that. I cannot even put it in a sentence that I fully believe. But I sat in that corridor for 9 hours, and I left without certainty, and that has never happened to me before. Thursday night, I drafted the survey. I filled in every line. Hazardous materials. Addressed per abatement report. 3 locations requiring crew notification. Structural conditions. Standard for age and vacancy period. No unusual risk factors. I attached my photographs, my sensor logs, my CO2 data. I left the occupancy line blank. Friday morning, Dale called at 8. I told him the survey was complete, except for the occupancy clearance. He asked what was preventing me from signing. I told him again about the baselines. He asked if the readings exceeded any threshold defined in the protocol. They did not. He asked if I had observed any direct evidence of occupancy. I had not. Yet he asked if I was recommending a sheriff's search. I was not, because I had no evidence to support one. He said, "Then what are you telling me, Carolyn?" And I said something I have never said in my professional life. I said, "I'm telling you I don't know." Dale was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that was not unkind, but that I have thought about every day since. "The form doesn't have a box for that." I signed the survey at noon on Friday. I checked the box. Facility confirmed unoccupied. I sent it to Dale. I drove home. The demolition was completed the following Wednesday. I know because Dale sent me the completion notice as part of the contract file closure, the way he always does. The notice included a summary from the demolition crew chief. No complications, no discoveries, no unusual findings in the debris. And the building came down in 2 days. The lot was cleared by Friday. Nothing was in the building. I had been wrong to hesitate. The baselines were instrument drift amplified by my own fixation. The CO2 differential was material off-gassing in a structure with degraded concrete and mold-active ceiling tiles. The audio recorder captured air movement through deteriorated ductwork. The sensation I felt during the 9-hour sit was fatigue and suggestion in an unfamiliar environment. Every anomaly had a mundane explanation, and the mundane explanations were almost certainly correct. I knew this. I accepted it. I closed my file on Holloway and moved on. That was 6 weeks ago. My next assignment is Braidwood Medical Center, a decommissioned 70-bed facility in Fayette County. Different county. It's different health system. This one's through a subcontract, not MedPAR directly. Different building, different era, different construction. The only structural similarity is that it's a closed hospital awaiting demolition, which describes roughly a third of my assignments in any given year. I drove out Monday. The building is newer than Holloway, built in 1989, closed in 2021. Steel frame with curtain wall, flat roof, single story with a partial basement, sealed the same way. Steel plates, plywood, chain on the service entrance. I opened it, went in, and began my walkthrough. Standard procedure, thermal imager active CO2, monitor logging, 6 pods deployed at key junctions. I walked every room. The building was in better condition than Holloway. Less water intrusion, less material degradation, on newer systems even in their disconnected state. Unremarkable. I finished the walkthrough. I waited out the sensor deployment period. I collected the pods and downloaded the logs in the van. The baseline on pod 1 was 2.3% above expected. I stopped. I looked at the number on my screen. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened my archived data from Holloway. Monday, the first day. Pod 1, deployed at the east stairwell, 2.3%. I opened the remaining 5 pods from Braidwood, 2.1, 2.6, 2.4, 2.2, 2.5. I opened Monday's full data set from Holloway, 2.1, 2.5, 2.4, 2.3, 2.8. The numbers were not similar. Similar I could dismiss. Baseline drift is random, but it clusters within ranges. Similar readings across similar equipment in similar environments would mean nothing. But these were not simply within the same range. Pod by pod, deployment by deployment, the first day readings at Braidwood were within 0.2% of the first day readings at Holloway. Reads across 6 sensors in 6 different locations, in a completely different building, in a completely different county, 63 miles away. I pulled up the CO2 log. The first reading, taken at the service entrance as I walked in, was 421 parts per million. I opened Holloway Monday. First reading, 421 parts per million. The outdoor ambient at Braidwood was 415. The outdoor ambient at Holloway on that first Monday had been 410. Different days, different weather, different baseline atmosphere. But inside both buildings, at the moment I stepped through the door, the CO2 concentration was the same. Not approximately, not within range. The same number. On the same instrument. 6 weeks and 63 miles apart. I sat in the van. The engine was off. The windows were up. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. And for the first time in my career, I was aware of my own breathing as a source, as something that adds to the air, that leaves a chemical trace in every room I enter, that changes the composition of the space I occupy. I had never thought about it that way before. My breath had always been a variable I accounted for and subtracted. Now it felt like something else, a signal, a marker, something I was leaving behind. I've not gone back into Braidwood. It is Tuesday evening. Dale has not called yet. This contract runs through a different project manager. But someone will. Someone will ask me when the survey will be ready. Someone will need a signature. And I will have to decide whether to walk back into a building where the air already knows the shape of my lungs. I know what the readings will show, whereas they will show what Holloway showed. A building that is almost empty. A building that is empty the way a glass is empty when the water line is below what you can see from above, but the bottom is still wet. The instruments will not trigger. The thermal imager will find nothing. The motion sensors will sit at their baselines and hum at a frequency that means either nothing is here or what is here is distributed so evenly that no single point of measurement can distinguish it from absence. And I will have to decide again, the same decision, the same form, the same checkbox. I signed it once. At Holloway, I confirmed the building was empty and the building came down and nothing was found. And now the same readings are here in a different building. Oh, I'm just waiting for me to walk through and measure them and find them inconclusive and sign them away again. I think about what Dale said. The form doesn't have a box for I don't know. The system requires a binary, occupied or unoccupied, present or absent, something or nothing. But what I measured at Holloway was not something, and what I'm measuring at Braidwood is not nothing. It is the exact same not nothing, reproduced with a precision that exceeds any instrumental or environmental explanation I can construct. And the only variable shared between the two buildings is me, my equipment, my deployment protocol, my breath in the air, my signature on the line. I certified Holloway as empty. The building was destroyed. 6 weeks later, the same readings appeared in a new building. And if I certify Braidwood as empty, and I have no actionable reason not to, the building will be destroyed. And 6 weeks after that, I will walk into another sealed facility and take my first CO2 reading, and it will say 421, and the pods will show their familiar baselines, and the air will have that same quality of settled, uniform, patient stillness. And each time I sign, the building comes down, and each time the building comes down, the readings move. I don't think I was wrong about Holloway. I don't think the building was occupied. I think it was occupied the way a word is occupied by its meaning, not by a physical presence, but by a condition, a state of the air and the silence and the space that is not emptiness, but is the shape that emptiness takes when it has been shaped. And I think my signature, the confirmation, we're the certification, the professional binary of yes, this is empty, didn't clear the building. It released the shape. It told the condition it could move. Because the condition was not trapped in Holloway. It was waiting in Holloway. Waiting for the same thing everything in the demolition pipeline waits for. Clearance. I gave it clearance. And now it is in Braidwood, waiting for me to do it again. I have started keeping a private log. Not for the survey, for myself. I record the readings from each building. The exact numbers, the deployment positions, the CO2 at entry. I am building a dataset that I cannot show anyone because it does not prove anything. It proves only that the same numbers keep appearing. And the same numbers in different buildings mean nothing to anyone who has not stood in both buildings and felt the same not emptiness in both and known in a way that no instrument can confirm and no form can contain, that she is measuring the same thing twice. The log is not evidence, it is a record of the gap between what I can measure and what I am required to certify. It is a record of the space the form does not have a box for. And if I am right, if the readings follow me, if each demolition moves the condition to the next sealed building in my queue, then the log is also a map of everywhere I've been asked, is this empty, and answered yes, and been wrong in a way that is true on every instrument and false in every room. I have 11 buildings left in my contract year. I'm going to go back into Braidwood tomorrow, when I'm going to deploy the pods and run the CO2 and walk every room and sit in the corridor and listen. And the building will behave exactly like an empty building. And I will feel the same thing I felt at Holloway. Not presence, not absence, but the impossibility of confirming either. And on Friday, or whenever the project manager calls, I will pull up the survey form and look at the checkbox and understand that checking it is not a lie, because the building is empty by every measure I possess. It is just not only empty. And the form doesn't have, a box for that.